I think as we think about being a team player, those passages that talk about our spiritual gifts seem to be they just seem to fit so well to me, and they seem to be so important there. As you think about being part of the team, you want to play your position on the team, and you want to play your position as well as you can. You want to be a good team player. Now, those passages, there are passages all throughout Scripture, and I think refer to this idea. You think about specifically those passages that refer to the spiritual gifts, and Paul again and again uses that concept of the body. And when we talk about that, the idea that he is giving us is that there are different body parts. Each body part has a different function. Each part comes in to play its part, and therefore we have something that's greater than the sum of all of its parts. We have something that works and is able to achieve more than each of the individuals could have achieved on its own. As we think about where our position is in the church and what we do in the church, I think those are things that are really important for us to keep in our minds as we try to do the best that we can. That the concept of synergy, that each of us can achieve more if we work together than we're going to be able to achieve if we work independently. When things repeat themselves, I have a tendency to think of those things as being really important. When you drive up on the flashing red light and it's constantly flashing, and that's to get your attention and tell you that there's something really important here. When Paul tells you, read the passage in Romans 12, there's a similar passage in 1 Corinthians 12. There's a similar passage when we talk about spiritual gifts in Ephesians 4. And there's miscellaneous passages that talk about those things. I think that we're getting that idea that this is something that's really important. When God's Word, the trend in books now is that books have gotten longer and longer and longer. I used to think that like a middle school book would be, just a few pages, or we'd call them chapter books, where you really graduated when you started reading chapter books. Well, as time has increased now, the kids' books are really long. It's really interesting to me how that trend has so far reversed. As a matter of fact, when I used to think of the Bible, I thought of it as this almost eternally long book. Now when I think of the Bible, it shocks me to think about how incredibly short it is. I mean, it just blows my mind. This Bible, most of it has notes on every page. And the first quarter of it and the last quarter of it are dictionary and concordance. And really the section that God has written to us, there's more man's idea about what God has written to us in this Bible than there are God's communication to us. If you get a Bible that's just what God has to say to us, it's, when you compare it to a lot of other books, it's relatively short. So when God repeats something, I think that's a pretty good indicator that it's important. It's really an important concept. And this idea of us working together, or synergy, that we can achieve more together, is constantly brought up. You think about some of the texts in the Old Testament. One of the ones that leaped to my mind is Nehemiah, about rebuilding the wall. When Nehemiah says that they were able to rebuild the wall the halfway of its height in such a short time because the people had a mind to work. They were all working together. And I always think about that when I think about what we can achieve if we all decide to work together. And then when you think about that concept, what story in the Bible leaps to mind about what we could all achieve if we all got together and we all set our minds to it, I think about the story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. That's such an intriguing story. But one of the things that if we all get together and we all are on the same page, what we can accomplish is just absolutely off the charts. Well, in the area that we live in, and in this area of the country, in Florence, Alabama, there are about 3 places or 4 places in the world that are this way. In Dallas, they have a Christian school. They have a large contingent of congregations of the Churches of Christ. You think about in the Northeast Arkansas area, they have the same kind of scenario that we do, and maybe around the Nashville area they have the same situation that we do. And then in the Florence area, Everybody that comes down here and visits, they joke and they say, there's a Church of Christ on every corner. Sometimes I kind of, if I get bored, I'll count how many I pass to drive to something. Well, it really is an astounding thing that we have so many congregations. There are some pros and some cons to that. And there are some good things and some bad things. And I want you to think about those good things and those bad things about it. And I want to discuss that in just a minute. One of the things that I see as a pro, as a good thing, is that we can achieve more if we work together. That concept of synergy, if all of us are able to work together, I think that we can achieve really great things. I just daydream sometimes whenever we get together. When we start talking about different things and things that we could do, I just daydream about what it would be like if you could get all of the members of the Churches of Christ in this area to go, and let's say that we all went down to the University of North Alabama, the football field there, and we just sat on the home side. I don't know what the stands would seat, but in my mind, I just cannot imagine much more awesome of an evening than having a singing. I know that the acoustics would be terrible, but I bet if you put 10 or 20,000 of us in one place singing, even outside, I think it would be pretty awesome. I think that it would be great. The con is that we very rarely really do work together. It's incredibly rare for us to all get together and be on the same page and to have one concept. If we all did work together, it would I just can't imagine what we could achieve. If you got all the churches, and you got all the members in the Quad City area together, and we all got ourselves on the same page, and like in the Tower of Babel, we were all able to communicate. We were all able to say and understand and hear what the other person is trying to communicate. And we all had a mind to work. I can't even conceive of what we would be able to accomplish. It's kind of unfortunate that all of us in our mind know that we would be able to achieve great things if we were able to do that. And then it's kind of disappointing to all of us are probably realist enough to know that is absolutely never going to happen. We can never do that, and that's kind of disappointing. I think one of the cons is that we don't communicate. I remember my biology teacher in high school. He said this thing one time, and it kind of stuck with me. He said we were talking about cells and the way that the body functioned. We'd been going through class all semester. We got down toward the end of the semester, and he just kind of stops at the board, and he's drawing, we're going over the review, and he says, it always blows my mind that all this stuff can be going on in your body, and you have no idea. It just always blows my mind. How is it that if the only way that you know that you have lungs is that somebody has told you that you have lungs, how would you, can you imagine what it would have been like in the era before we had medicine, or the era before modern medicine even, when you don't even have a concept of what's going on in your body, and it's your body. Your brain is controlling it. Your brain is telling it what to do, and you have no concept of what's going on in there. It seems like you ought to be able to run some kind of self-diagnostic and say, I've got, my kidneys are only operating at 73%. It seems like that it ought to work that way, but somehow it doesn't work that way. We have no idea what's actually going on in our body. It's almost crazy that we need doctors who are outside, they're external, and they probe internal to find out what's going on inside my body that my brain controls, and that I have full control over my brain. It seems that it ought to work in a different way than what it does work. And really the church, that body kind of works the same way. I wish that our eldership, in this area would get together. I've already griped about this morning, but it drives me crazy that our elderships in this area, how could you be in charge, how could you be the leader of one of these congregations in this area and not get together with the other leaders in this area at least just as a minimum, it seems like you would want to get together with the other elders at least once a year, and everybody sits down and they say, well, what are you having problems with? Here's what we're having problems with. Well, our member left here and went there. How are they doing? And I think we haven't seen a lot of so-and-so. It seems like if you were a good shepherd, that if your sheep are hopping over your fence and they're getting into somebody else's fold, that you'd be like, you'd want to ask that shepherd, even if we're on the same team, I would say, I want to know how that sheep's doing if you cared about the sheep. And that to me is one of the frustrating things, one of the negatives, that I just can't imagine that the elders in this area don't want to have that. How they cannot want to have some kind of consortium or some kind of once a year meeting when they all get together and they all improve, that just absolutely boggles my mind. Another one of the things I think is a negative is the perceived idea of why there are so many congregations in this area. Why are there so many churches in this area? That's not necessarily rhetorical. I'll let does anybody? What's your gut? What's your heart tell you why there are so many churches in this area?
I can tell you that a lot of the new ones start up because a group of people leave an old congregation. It's not because they need a new building in that area.
That's right. There is some truth in it that the reason that there are so many different congregations in this area is because we can't get along with each other. There's some truth in that we don't like it. We don't like these other people over here, and so we're going to leave and we're going to go study another congregation because we can't get along with this group. That's really, that's a tough thing. That's a tough thing for us to get over. On the other hand, if you think about church growth in the New Testament, conflict is a powerful motivator for church growth in the New Testament. As a matter of fact, just to throw out two really easy examples of that, one would be with Paul. And Paul has a little problem on going on a missionary journey, and so we had a team that was going to go on a missionary journey, but the end result is that we have two teams that go on separate missionary journeys. So we in effect doubled our efforts because of a conflict. And that was the resolution to the conflict. My heart tells me that they did not hate each other. I don't think that that's the cause. But I think the end result was that we parted and that we had two missionary journeys as opposed to one missionary journey because of conflict. Would it have been better? You can ask what ifs. I don't know about the what ifs. I wish that we had decided, hey, we've got so many people that want to go on missionary journeys, we should take two teams. That probably would have been better. But it was motivated through the conflict and it worked out well. Another one would be the dispersion. Because there's major conflict, there's outside conflict in Jerusalem, and the brethren go everywhere. But it's because as a result of the conflict, we can't. There again, that conflict is inflicted from external sources rather than from internal sources. But that is that as a result of that conflict that we have a mass evangelism effort. If you leave us alone, we tend to leave you alone. As humanity, or as a church group, if you leave the church alone, what happens is we'll have a growing phase, we'll have a phase where we tend to plateau, we level off, and the sustaining phase, and then we'll kind of have a deterioration. And American business, if you look at American businesses, they divide it up into three phases. They'll have a growth phase, and then they'll have a maintenance phase, and then they'll have a phase when they deteriorate. And that tends to happen. I won't get into my tirade about we mimic American business model in church, but that tends to happen in churches, that we'll have a growth phase. And I think most of the time, historically, if you look at the church, there will be some conflict oriented around that growth phase. Then we're going to have a plateau phase. And if you leave us alone, what is going to happen is we'll just begin to deteriorate if you leave us alone. If there's not something that happens in that congregation, if there's not some kind of precipitating event, then we're just going to stay where we're at. We're not going to move. I'm not going to go on a diet. It's probably not going to happen unless there's some problem, unless there's some external force that's exerted on me. And I've noticed that when I wake up, my arms are numb. I think, well, I probably ought to do something about that. It's probably time to lose a couple pounds. When I walk up the steps, I have to stop 3 times to get up the flight of steps. And, now when it becomes painful enough to me that I decide, okay, I've really got to do something about that, then I will do something about it. Until that point, we're probably not going to do something about it. It's very rare for us to just decide to make a good choice. There usually has to be something that initiates that. So in churches in this area, I think that has come a lot from conflict, and I would say that there are more churches in this area as a result of conflict with other congregations. But I also say that there are more Christians in this area because there are more churches. So it's not. It is a bad thing. It's not necessarily the worst thing ever. In the last, we've got just a few minutes left. I'd like to open it up and have y'all throw out some things, because I know that having talked to you that there's some really pros. There's some really good things and things that are useful. I'd asked Philip earlier, and he came up with 2 things that I had not thought about. I thought were terrific. And one was about isolating yourself in ministry, and that a lot of times preachers, when you graduate school, if you move to Minnesota, you're going to be relatively isolated in your peer group, because you're probably not going to have a lot of other full-time ministers. But in this area, you can have that. It's sad that sometimes we isolate ourselves, and that's really an unfortunate thing. We have ministers in this area who isolate themselves and who don't work within their peer group. There again, it seems like we could achieve better things if we would work together at some level. And we certainly, I didn't mention this, but I think we certainly have to heal those conflicts, even though they may have been a precipitator to move us into church growth or to move us into making an action that ultimately is good. I think that we need to make sure that those relationships are healed and healthy. And if your congregation isolates itself from all the other congregations in this area, I can't imagine that looking healthy from people who are on the outside looking in. Does anybody?
Well, one thought too that kind of goes along with that. One advantage we have here: the churches don't tend really to fuss and fight. Sometimes preachers isolate themselves because the churches that are nearby just can't get along, and fortunately we don't have that problem. So it should make for a really good reason to have a really strong peer group to lean on and learn from and be encouraged by and all those sorts of things. Yet when you look at our preacher's lunch here, it tends to be a very old group of guys. A lot of the younger guys don't get involved, and and they may have their own groups, peer groups that they get involved with, but it should be an advantage for us, I guess is what I'm saying.
I'm going tonight to Bible Emphasis School in Athens. That's been set up for over 30-something years, to where preachers and elders get together and talk about biblical problems and biblical studies and things like that. But like you say, it's an older group. There are some younger groups. I go to the one in Athens and the one in Winfield, and Winfield's a lot younger. One thing that you said about Paul saying something 3 different times in 3 different places to 3 different letters and 3 different and since 1978, I've been in some sort of sales, except I guess now I'm selling salvation. But and since 1978, I have sold something. I've sat through numerous sales seminars, and almost every one of them will say, to get someone to understand something so that they can take it with them, you have to tell them 3 times. It has to be repeated 3 times. And I'd love to do a study, I haven't yet, of the times in the Bible where Jesus says, verily, verily, I say to you, or surely, surely, I say to you. And that is, he's saying, listen up. And he says things usually 3 times.
just little things that I don't understand. Is I don't like I don't understand in our area why every congregation here has a youth minister who's planning individual activities for each individual congregation, and each of those youth groups are going in a separate direction all the time. It seems to me like what would happen if all these youth ministers got together and they said, "Hey, we're going to go to, we're going to take a field trip, and we're going to go to." We're going to go to Cathedral Caverns. We're going to go to the cave over here. And so he calls all the other youth ministers, and they just all decide, hey, let's all just go. Let's just take, the Shoals area is just going to go over there. We're just going to buy the place out, and we're going to go over there, and we'll ask them to turn the lights off. When they turn the lights off at the back row, we're going to sing. And what if instead of taking a youth group to, on one of these field trips, what if we all went? What if instead of 20 of them went, that you take your 20 and they take their 30 and they take their 10 and they take their 2 and we showed up over there with 1,200? It seems like that would be more powerful than taking 20, even if your 20 intermingled basically with their 20. But to be there with 1,200 seems like it would be a better idea, and it would cost nobody any more money than when it already cost everybody to do their own thing. Now I don't understand why we don't do things like that. But I wish it did work that way. I wish it did work that way. There are some. What do you think is a pro? What could we use as a good thing in this area?
I was going to say something like out in the county, like New Hope, Pine Hill, and Maud. They do all their youth things together. Usually, they might have a couple by themselves, but. Another thing out in the county, one of the reasons we have so many churches out there is because of T.B. Larimore. When they started all the congregations, they were in the wagon and horse days. And so he and his preachers were very evangelistic. And so they went out and planted a congregation every 5 miles. And so out every road from Florence. That's why, there's so many out there. And some of them, they've been there for years, and they're hanging on, and they're small. And a lot of times we think, well, I wish we could get them all together, because then you could have a big group over here. But the family, there was usually a family at each one that took charge. And they feel like, and it's their, descendants, but they feel like it's wrong for them to just give up and, and go somewhere else. But that's part of it. But in the past, we did more together. We had, out the Central Stadium, we had Jack Exum come, and all the congregations in the county went out there and filled up the whole stadium. In the 80s, I don't remember what year that was, but in the 80s, we had a training for service series over at Mars Hill, and all the congregations got together and taught people how to teach different levels of classes, how to hold Bible studies, how to, just do all sorts of things like that. So we used to get together more. I don't know why we're not now.
Don't you think there's a word that hadn't been said that has a lot to do with why there's so many different congregations? Autonomy.
Well,
a lot of people believe that's...
And I see that as a pro. That's a good thing. Sometimes we think that we ought to be, it ought to be like Christians ought to look like a cookie cutter. And there's a real big danger in that when we do mission work, a lot of times we will go to Africa and we will plant a North Alabama Church of Christ. I've been to other countries where we sit down and you can close your eyes and you don't know that you're not in Florence, Alabama. I think that's a bad thing. I think that their culture should be reflected in it as opposed to our culture being reflected in the way that they do service. But in this area, we are all slightly different, and I don't think that it's a bad thing that you can find one that kind of, I don't want to say suits your taste, because that seems like I'm saying it's okay to bend scripture. I don't think it is okay. But I think that it is okay to find one that fits within your culture. As a matter of fact, I would argue that if you take a larger congregation, if you take a congregation of 400 members, really what you're going to have is a bunch of little churches that operate within that large congregation. There's a bunch of little cliques. If you'd rather it, I'd rather it not be defined that way. But that's what I have always seen, is that you have cliques of 5, 10, 15, and 20 that operate as in cell groups. They just happen to meet together. And so, in a sense, I think that's what happens in the Florence area, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing at this point. And I don't know that it's necessarily a good thing or necessarily a bad thing, but I think what we need to understand is, in the paradigm that we've been given, how do we work best within the situation that we find ourselves? I think that would be that we make sure that we interact as much as we can. I talked to one of the guys a while ago, and he said, this is a great place. One of the things I see about this is this is one of the best places in the world to raise your kids. That is. Almost everybody that they meet is a member of the church or as a strong Christian, maybe, of a denominational flavor. But almost everybody that you meet is a strong Christian, and most of them have, they believe exactly the same thing you do. That's a really good thing. On the other hand, I think it's a really bad thing that if I get irritated with the congregation that I attend, that I can just take my liver and go somewhere else and add another liver to some other congregation somewhere. I think that's really a bad thing. And so I wish our elderships would do little exit interviews and entrance interviews and say, why are you leaving and why are you here? And I wish that we would do that, but there again, preachers, we love to talk about elders.
Well, a pro of having so many congregations and smaller congregations is that we put our young people to work. At Cherokee, we've got, I think it's 70% of the people that do the service of the church are below the age of 16.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we conclude, let me encourage you to be thinking about this, the way this works. If you find yourselves in one of those areas, how you can increase it and use it for the benefit of the kingdom, versus how sometimes we do things that are really detrimental to the kingdom. If you isolate yourself, I think that looks bad from the outside. I think it's going to be tough when we try to convert people to come to the church and they say, well, you can't even get along with the people who are next door to you. Or they know some of the history of the area and they know, I think that can really be bad for us. I think we need to make sure that we do love our sister congregations and that we do demonstrate that. We'll conclude with a prayer, but be thinking about how you can plug yourself in, and that you can always be a positive in any place that you find yourself in the Lord's kingdom, and so that we are all working together on the same team, as opposed to how even sometimes unconsciously or subconsciously we do things that are detrimental to the kingdom. And we always need to be thinking, what am I doing, and is it working together? Am I working within the team, or am I doing things that are hurting the team?